So cardiovascular disease is not really one thing you could say. It's like a series of things. It could be like a stroke, a heart attack, heart failure, valve problems, and it's not just like one disease. It's not just like, hey, you have cardiovascular disease, like, hey, you have the flu, or hey, you have multiple sclerosis. It's not just like one kind of a disease. It's like this wide encompassing thing that usually takes like years and years of health neglect to kind of develop these things. And after you get this cardiovascular disease, you have to kind of start changing things around because some of these things are reversible. A lot of the major players with cardiovascular disease, you're gonna always hear like hypertension, diabetes contributes to it, and then like those are reversible to a certain extent. But the fact is, like, sometimes they get so severe where you're going to have to kind of just live with these things, like kind of like diabetes. I know this isn't a diabetes talk, but a lot of times diabetes also contributes to cardiovascular disease. So for example, if you have uncontrolled diabetes, you have pre-diabetes, that's still reversible. You can still reverse that, change your diet, change how much you move, how active you are, and then you can reverse that. But once you get diabetes and you become like insulin dependent or dependent on medication for lowering your blood sugar, then that's kind of sticking with you forever, because it's cardiovascular disease, same with diabetes, is they're like silent diseases. Like you don't really feel anything different unless your sugar is super high, or you don't really feel anything unless your blood pressure is super high. Then you might get dizzy. Same with like your blood sugars. When your blood sugar is super high, you might get real thirsty, something like that. That you won't really know that your sugars are high or heart rate or blood pressure is elevated, or if it's like in the medium. And it's like you're living there, but you're constantly you're constantly creating this damage where it's just like you don't feel different, but the damage is occurring. That's like the scariest aspect of it, and then leads to like strokes and heart attacks.
Yeah, just like you said, it's a chronic buildup, and it takes time. This doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
So the next topic we're going to cover are strokes, and you have two types of strokes, one of them being ischemic, the other one hemorrhagic. So when it comes to ischemic stroke, that's literally a clot or something that's occluding the blood vessel that's leading, perfusing the blood, and that's why you always hear in strokes, time is brain. The second one is hemorrhagic stroke, and that's literally a burst blood vessel that's preventing blood to perfuse into the brain. That's usually due to poor vasculature / hypertension is the most common cause. And you see this often like in the sticky that I worked, where you just have patients that are old, frail, fell, boom, stuff bursted. And it gets a lot worse when they're on medication like Eliquis, which is the more preferred medication versus Coumadin because of the testing, but there's nothing to reverse it, and you're just monitoring this person, and hopefully the body's able to do its thing. The pill is gonna leave the body, and you could stop the blood from the blood vessel from bleeding out. Some diet modifications are going to affect cardiovascular disease. One of the big things that we have been working on, and the FDA and all that are reducing it, is trans fats, and that's basically a artificial fatty acid that the industry has been using to make food taste better. It's basically adding hydrogen to liquid vegetable oils to become more solids. Restaurants like it because it creates better texture, improves taste, and they also could reduce that oil. It's not completely illegal, even though there's a direct correlation between trans fats and heart disease. And there's a recommendation for you, ideally get less than 2 grams in your diet per day. Closer to 0, the better. The FDA recommends that products contain less than 0.5 grams per serving size. And this is where it's kind of like it's messed up, because the population doesn't know it. Like if you have pizza and the serving size is 1/6, and if it's less than 0.5 grams in that serving size, technically the company could list it as 0. But now if you're adding the whole pizza, all 6 slices, let's just say an average American maybe could eat that. Now maybe you're consuming 4 or 5 grams of trans fats that you weren't even aware of it. There should be a fat ass slap on that box that says 5 grams of trans fats leads to heart disease, just like the freaking cigarette companies have it. But consumerism, right? We can't do that. So instead, they manipulate these serving sizes and make you think that you're eating healthy or whatever it is. But anyways, fast food, donuts, pie crusts, cookies, crackers, margarines, all that stuff are going to have trans fats. Please reduce it and make some substitutes in your life for it.
Trans fats are also naturally occurring. So milk is going to have trans fats, and so is butter. Natural butter is also going to have trans fats. But currently it's 2022 and there has not been any research done comparing artificial trans fats and trans fats that are naturally occurring. No one's looking at that because I'm sure naturally occurring trans fats are going to have probably a little bit more of a positive aspect than artificial trans fats. So there's different classes of heart failure. We're not going to go in depth in each class of heart failure, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different scales that you could look at, and doctors are very educated, very knowledgeable on this. Like, it was always cool seeing that, like, when I used to work in Chicago, like, hey, this person has heart failure class this, and this, and then they treated it depending on that. But we're not going to go in depth into that. But heart failure happens. You get diagnosed with heart failure when there is so much damage in your heart. You have so much uncontrolled hypertension, or you've had a bunch of heart attacks, or you have a bunch of occlusions that they can't operate on, and we can't do any intervention, so your heart starts to work harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, and eventually you go into heart failure, where it's almost an irreversible thing. I believe that majority of people, once they get diagnosed with any kind of stage of heart failure, it's basically going to progress from there, and there's really not a lot of things you could do, and you're eventually going to die from that heart failure. Like, if you do it early on, where you have like the first class of heart failure, like, you could still do everything normally. Like, that's like a serious lifestyle change. Like, hey, no, this is my life now with heart failure. I had this forever now, and it's time to change. Because once you're in heart failure, it's very hard to reverse it and get out of heart failure. Like, that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, like diabetes, and it's very intense.
Yeah, and that's why also after you having a heart attack, they do echoes usually post-op day one after the stent to see what is your ejection fraction that you're experiencing. Sometimes, just like we mentioned, the first time something might not happen, second time you're ruining that ejection fraction, which leads you into the higher risks of developing heart failure.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways you go into heart failure. You go into heart failure because of valve issues. You go into heart failure because of hypertension. You go into heart failure because you have a lot of ischemic cardiac damage, because you have a lot of plaque, because your coronaries are plaqued up. It's not just like you have hypertension, then you got heart failure. It's a lot of things contribute to it, and there's a lot of different means of getting heart failure from, not just necessarily one. If you want to watch or listen to our latest episode,
you can check us out on Apple, Spotify, or watch us on YouTube.